Well, hi everyone. My name is Annalisa Goodman, and I'm on the communications team at Kline School of Law. Today, I'm joined by Professor Lisa Tucker to discuss her new book, Hamilton and the Law, Reading Today's Most Contentious Legal Issues to the Hit Musical. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk about the book. Thank you.
Well, I can't wait. Let's just dive right in. So, in the preface of Hamilton and the Law, you say that the idea for this book came to you while you and your daughter were touring colleges. What were the most immediate legal issues that stood out to you during that first revelation?
Sure. Yeah. So, yes, my daughter and I were on those 10-day road trips that you do junior year during spring break, see as many liberal arts colleges as you can. And we both loved Hamilton. We both love musical theater. And I was actually a drama major undergrad. So this was pretty much on auto replay on the Apple Play on the car. And we were both singing along. And then at some point I turned to my daughter and I said, we know how this story ends. We know from the very beginning, even if you're not a student of American history, Hamilton and Burr tell you at the very beginning. Burr says, I'm the damn fool that killed him. And so we know that's going to happen at the end. So what is the purpose of the story? And of course, there's a narrative purpose to the story. But as a lawyer, I see the world through legal lenses. And so I said, I think that what they're doing here is that they're creating an evidentiary record. What Lin-Manuel Miranda is doing is showing us the motivations and actions of these characters over the 25, 30 years that preceded the duel. And if you look at it in that light, you start to hear certain lines that the characters say. Or if you're watching, on Disney Plus now, you can watch it. You see how they move, how they stand near each other, what they do. And all of a sudden you say, oh my gosh, I think maybe Burr did intend all along to kill him. Or maybe, actually, I think Hamilton wanted to kill Burr and Burr was acting in self-defense. And there's support for that all through the musical. And so it's really fun as a lawyer to treat this as evidence that you could bring in at trial. And that was where we started with the idea.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's so interesting. I love your approach. I think it's really unique to read a musical through a legal analysis lens. And another thing that was really unique, as I understand it, is that you connected with many of your contributors through Facebook, which is fascinating. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that process.
Sure. So what happened next was that I'm pretty involved in the Supreme Court advocacy community. And so every year at the end of the Supreme in late April, there's a big party in Washington to celebrate the end of the Supreme Court term. It's held at Georgetown Law School. So pretty soon after, I was heading down to DC to go to this event. And I was talking to various friends who attend this event every year, just like I do. And I was saying, my daughter and I were talking about this. Isn't it funny? Have you ever thought about Hamilton this way? And immediately, so many of them said, oh my gosh, like we sing it around the office. And one very prominent lawyer, Neil Cocktail, said, oh my gosh, I listened to it in preparation for my big argument in the immigration case before the Supreme Court. And I started to see that it wasn't just me, like other lawyers were seeing legal themes. So I decided to put out a call on Facebook and say, any other lawyers or law profs here see this? And I would say within 12 hours, I had probably 50 responses. Oh, yes. Have you ever thought about this? Oh, my gosh, I love this. Of course, let's have this conversation. So at that point, I started saying, well, what would you think about writing a little essay about what you see in Hamilton that applies to your specialty in the law? And I had people from copyright lawyers to torts professors to people who specialize in domestic violence saying, this is what I see. This is the story that I think we can tell.
Well, starting off the book is an essay by Richard Primus, and in it he argues that Hamilton the musical is a type of myth-making, which allows not necessarily a reinterpretation of the past, but a recontextualization to how the Constitution and the Founding Fathers relate to us today.
Yes.
And in many ways, I feel like this is a premise of the entire book. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on this as it applies to today's cultural moment as our country begins to reckon and struggle with its past.
Yeah, so we are definitely doing that for a long time. And I think it's really important that we always do that we think about where this country came from and where we want it to go. Some people talk about the concept of a living constitution, that when the founders created the Constitution, when they wrote it, when the states ratified it, that there was an understanding that America was going to change a lot over the coming years, and that the Constitution was intended to be a set of guidelines, a set of rules that could be expanded, contracted, adapted to however society did those things. There are other people who believe that what we really need to do is look back to what the founders intended. What did the founders write? What did they understand these words to mean? And then that's the way we should always interpret the Constitution. That modern thinking on it is much less important than how the founders, like Alexander Hamilton, saw the Constitution. And these have always been, or at least for a very long time, dueling ways that we interpret the Constitution. And I use that word dueling very intentionally because, of course, duels are the heart of Hamilton. And we see this idea of dueling all the way through. But as many of my contributors point out, dueling takes many forms. And, there's verbal dueling, there's ideological dueling. And of course, in the hip hop tradition, there's hip hop duels. There are actually rap duels. And so I love that idea of dueling. So what Richard Primus his premise is that we've always seen, we know that the Constitution was written by white men who owned land, right? So white wealthy men, essentially. And so in thinking about how the founders thought about the Constitution and what the words meant to them, we're looking at it from one very narrow perspective. But that if we can envision the founders as something as other than rich white men, as Lin-Manuel Miranda does, he puts people of color into these roles. He gives women power in the founding. If we can envision that, then maybe it makes the concept of originalism a more progressive idea. And maybe we can use the concept of originalism in a progressive interpretation mode. And so I think that idea is all through the book. How can we look at ideas we've had for a long, long time about the founding or the Constitution or about law and where it comes from? And how does Hamilton inform us on those things and make us think differently about that? And I think it's really important to say the book doesn't reach any conclusions. It just asks a lot of questions. And to me, that's the most fun kind of book to read, because I love it if I've read something and then over the dinner table, I can say to my family, what do you think about this? And, and especially right now during the pandemic, we all need good topics of conversation.
Hamilton offers a different paradigm regarding a public figure's conduct than what we've seen in the Supreme Court today. If Hamilton is a type of myth-making that allows us to imagine different futures, do you think the same can and should be true in imagining different moral paradigms for public figures?
Yeah, so the point I make in my essay is that we know that the Reynolds pamphlet was really Alexander's downfall in real life, Alexander Hamilton's downfall, that he had engaged in this extramarital affair with this woman, that in fact he was blackmailed about it by her husband. And one of the essays actually brings up, was this a form of domestic violence of the husband against Maria Reynolds? To me, if he did know about it, which is certainly a question that's raised in the musical, then it's a form of him pimping her out in a way. And so Alexander Hamilton admits in the Reynolds pamphlet, in real life and in the musical, yeah, I did this, and let me explain what happened. And he's really, he really is vilified for it. He loses his political capital. There's the song, Never Gonna Be President Now, right? Like, this has been his downfall. And there's an understanding that he himself has done something wrong. Now, whether or not we should take into account someone's personal life in making political, decisions about whether they're fit for office, I think is another question. But certainly there is responsibility placed on Alexander Hamilton's head. You did do this thing, you've admitted to it. Sure, the woman was complicit, but you did it, right? And what we've seen instead in modern times, particularly in Supreme Court confirmations, is a development from that stance, where, for example, we had Douglas Ginsburg, not with a woman, but with marijuana. He said, yes, it's true, I smoked marijuana. And this disqualified him from being a Supreme Court justice. I smoked marijuana. And, like in the 70s, when everybody smoked marijuana, right? This disqualified him. To Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh, who were accused of much, much worse by women who were themselves very credible. We're talking about a lawyer and a very distinguished professor saying, you did this to me. You attempted rape against me, or you sexually harassed me on more than one occasion in a very explicit way. And instead of the men being vilified, it's the women who are vilified. The women who are told, what are you doing? Do you have an agenda? Are you lying? And in fact, the men being able to hold on to their political capital by saying, these women are lying. These women, are trying to get me. And that the shift that's taken place in American society where we're willing to say, yeah, it's okay, even though these women are giving a very credible account of what happened to them and, have evidence that this happened. We told people at the time, there's a calendar, okay, we're going to blame the women because, they're being mean to you. And so asking, why is it that we've made that shift? And again, taking out the question of, if you've done something in your personal life, like had an affair, should that disqualify you? But here we're actually having women accuse these men of crimes pretty credibly, and that it's the woman who is made the villain. And I just really wonder why that is. So I just raise those questions and say, should this be the way it is? Or should men say, yeah, here's my Reynolds pamphlet? And by the way, I don't limit this to men and women. I do limit to, but if it were the other way around, if it were a woman and a man being the accuser, I would be asking the same question.
Of course. Yeah. It's such an important question to ask. Another question that's come up recently, I'm sure you've seen the news about about how we understand Hamilton, his history. I was wondering, do you think our understanding of Hamilton the musical should change in light of the recent revelation about Hamilton possibly enslaving individuals and participating in the institution of slavery?
I think this is a super tough question. And I think it really depends on how much you rely on Hamilton the musical to be an accurate historical account of what happened. Since the very, very beginning, if you look at critiques that were written of the musical very soon after it opened, historians were saying, all this portrayal of Hamilton as an abolitionist, it goes a little far. Like, he wasn't nearly as great on the topic of abolition as the musical makes him out to be. That critique has been out there from the beginning. And so the fact that it has now come to light that he owned slaves, I think contributes to that critique. However, we have to recognize that all of Hamilton is an imagination. It's all a rewriting. George Washington wasn't Black. Alexander Hamilton, wasn't brown-skinned. And so we have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of that? And is the purpose of the retelling in the way that Miranda retells it to give a vision of America that can change, that can still come to be? Miranda has said, this is the story of America then told by America now. And so if you're not going to be absolutely true to historical detail all the way through, is it worthwhile to tell the story of America then in a way that leads to a better America now? So I think it's really important for people who love the musical to know this is the historical truth, not to think that this is real. So much of it is not real. But to also be able to look at it as a parable, as a fable, as something that has something to teach us and maybe to give us some hope. Just as you said, our country is so divided right now. And in Hamilton, the country is divided too, but somehow they still managed to create this new nation. And I think that's the message that Hamilton gives us.
That's great. I think you have already answered this question in many ways, so I'm going to revise it a little bit. But I was curious initially what you want readers to walk away with from your book. You said previously that you want to provoke questions. And now I'm wondering, what do you want readers to do with those questions?
So first of all, I don't think readers have to ask all the questions that I do. When I conceived of the book, I definitely wanted it to be a book not just for academics and not just for lawyers. What I wanted it to do was show an average educated readership. I always say it's sort of the NPR population. That you can read in your own stuff, the things that interest you, into this musical. and that some of what is in the book may not appeal to you at all. There's this one review on Goodreads of the book that's like, oh, this seemed really cool, but then there are all these essays on copyright law. And I'm like, you know what, that's fine. Like, you don't have to be into copyright law. Maybe what you're into is constitutional law. Maybe what you're into is defamation law. And that's all in there. So my first thing is, the essays are very short. They're about 2,500 words each, so about 10 pages. And they're all written in the style of an article you might read in, say, The Atlantic or The New Yorker. So you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be interested in every single topic. But if you put a pot of, water on the stove to boil for spaghetti, and you need to wait 7 minutes for it to boil, you can sit and read one of these essays and think a little bit. And what I'm hoping it's going to do is help people who do other things. What do you see about your own life, about your own views, about duels you've had that speak to you in light of the musical? So again, I'm hoping it's more of a conversation starter than a conversation dictator.
I love that. That's so, I feel like that's the best quality in any book. So I'm curious, where can people find the book?
So you can go to my website, which is hamiltonandthelawbook.com. That will lead you to an Amazon link to buy the book. Or of course, you can just go on any of the sites that you typically shop for books. I would normally send people to your local bookstore because I'm a huge fan of independent bookstores, but right now I'd really rather you stay home.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Annalisa. Take care.
Thank you, you too.